who will be giving her take, having been on the inside. The Prime Minister is set to lay out new legislation which promises to deal with the perennial problem of channel crossings. What do you make of it? And later, as the lockdown files continue to wreak havoc, Tim Stanley will be here to ask if we get the politicians we deserve. State of the Nation starts now. We'll also be hearing from our panel, Baroness Foster of Oxton and former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Yes, another socialist. As ever, I want to hear from you. Please get in touch by emailing mailmog@gbnews.uk. Before all that, it's been a busy day, and here to keep us up to date is Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Our top story tonight on GB News. Charities are warning thousands of asylum seekers will be left permanently in limbo under new government plans to tackle illegal immigration. The new laws would ban those crossing the English Channel in small boats from claiming asylum and from returning to the UK. The government has promised to provide more safe routes. And GB News has learned 3,000 people have made the journey so far this year, nearly double the year before. The Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, says the government isn't doing enough.
We need action to stop the dangerous boat crossings that are putting lives at risk and also undermining border security. That's why we've called for a new cross-border police unit to go after the criminal gangs that are really driving this, as well as a new agreement with France and an overhaul of the asylum system to end hotel use.
Well, also in the news today, former Metropolitan Police Officer Wayne Couzens has been sentenced to a further 19 months in prison after pleading guilty to 3 charges of indecent exposure. The court heard how he exposed himself to a woman on a country lane while on duty just months before murdering Sarah Everard. The 50-year-old is already serving a whole life sentence for her murder in 2021. Firefighters have voted overwhelmingly to accept a new pay offer, ending the prospect of strike action. The deal is for a 7% pay increase, backdated to July last year, plus an additional 5% from July. 96% of the Fire Brigade's union members accepted the offer, but the General Secretary admitted it was another real terms pay cut. Specialist police officers investigating a car crash in South Wales that killed 3 young people and severely injured 2 others say they're still trying to piece together what happened. The 5 occupants of the car weren't found until the early hours of Sunday morning, despite being reported missing and despite being adjacent to a main road. One mother is reported to have been told by police to stop calling for updates. Police say the group went on a night out on Friday and were last seen in the early hours of Saturday morning. And lastly, a yellow weather warning for snow and ice is in place across large parts of the UK. The Met Office has issued alerts for much of the South, the Midlands, South Wales and Northern Ireland from 9 o'clock tonight until 10 tomorrow morning. One is already in place in northern and eastern Scotland and the northeast of England. Tuesday is expected to be the coldest night of the year. Wrap up warm. That's it on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're up to date on GB News, the People's Channel. More now from Jacob Rees-Mogg.
This is the state of the nation, and we have a lot to talk about. So much has been going on in the last few days. But one of the things that is really important is to talk about how the prevent strategy has been working or not working. We had a report recently that came out that showed that freedom is effectively under threat more than at any time in our recent history. Now, is this just hyperbole? But the prevent programme that was established to monitor people at risk of Islamist radicalisation has been looking at people like me. That's how the programme has gone astray, and that's what William Shawcross's report showed. It's been taken over by people who were embarrassed to say Islamist terrorism. They failed to define this term in public. And in the eyes of the left-wing establishment, extremists turned out to mean anyone who mocked their idea of the state. The Cabinet Secretary even said that people who opposed lockdown were extreme right-wingers. But a programme established to protect the British people from a murderous threat became an exercise in politically correct control. The Shawcost report found that Prevent monitored, and I quote, a cohort of social media users it termed actively patriotic and proud. Now, you and I may think that being actively patriotic and proud is a good thing, but the lefties didn't, and it listed a prominent Conservative politician and former member of the government as being supposedly among figures associated with far-right sympathetic audiences and Brexit. And that person was me. So what do you think it was they found so threatening about me? Is it my double-breasted suits, my distribution of extremist literature like the novels of P.G. Wodehouse with his dangerous newt-loving character Gussie Finknottle, Bingo Little, or Uffe Prosser, the Drones Club's millionaire? My repeated wearing in public of cufflinks is perhaps dangerous, or striped shirts indicate a radical streak. But this is both comical and sinister. The list of potential red flags included those who enjoy the great film and performances of Alec Guinness in A Bridge Over the River Kwai, Sean Bean in the on-screen adaptation of Bernard Cornwell's Sharp novels, or even those who enjoy learning a bit of outdoors on a Sunday afternoon with Ray Mears' bushcraft. They were all seen as a step towards right-wing extremism. So I'm afraid, my dear viewers, you've got to be careful that you're not thought of as being a threat, according to the left-wing blob. Because what will now get us, you, on a list, is doing what people in this country didn't think twice about for hundreds of years. Being proud of our country, upholding our traditions, standing up for the national anthem, doing those things that make our country a wonderful place to live, a special place, a valued place. It turned out that anyone who doesn't subscribe to the views of the people running Prevent were extremists, including those who gently mocked the state. So yes, Minister, Sir Humphrey was considered dangerous. The Sir Humphreys thought Sir Humphrey was dangerous. There seems to be some illogicality in that. The demands of the Liberal establishment are so extreme that they have become anti-democratic. They do not trust the people to govern themselves. And you actually saw this today in a leak or a comment from a government minister saying the row over Sue Gray would encourage GBNews viewers and conspiracy theorists. You see, they're nervous of people like us who believe in democracy. And we mustn't have a public life that is only for people who don't like our country. We are a good people, a kind people, a noble people, a free people. We may allow room for fusty old eccentrics like me, but our traditions are not fusty or eccentric. Parliament, free speech, sovereignty, freedom of association, patriotism, trust in each other. They are what keep us free and prosperous. And the passing fads of the increasingly absurd liberal establishment, the European Union, the open borders, the suppression of national identity, that led to Brexit. That's why they are failing. So be of good heart, take cheer, the power of the blob will not succeed. Brexit shows how we can govern ourselves, and this exposure of Prevent also shows the lunacy of the blob, and Nicola Sturgeon's downfall was perhaps the icing on the cake. Anyone frightened of me or Yes Minister is such a Looney Tune that the British voter will never let them succeed. Tell me what you think. I want to know your views about this and the other subjects we discussed this evening, so please get in touch. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.uk. But to go into more detail on what I've been discussing, I'm so pleased to be joined by former counter-extremism officer, now of the Henry Jackson Society, Charlotte Littlewood. Charlotte, do you think that the Henry Jackson Society would itself be on the list of extreme organisations on this basis of Prevent? Because it certainly is a right-wing think tank.
Well, in the way you've just put it there, standing for our values and having pride in the West and pride in who we are, put you on that list, as you've explained, which would then very much put us on the list too. But I would take a slightly different interpretation of why these things were on the list. And I think it was less because they thought it was a threat, and more because they were wanting to look palatable to the general public, look like they were balancing the books, look like they were opposing all forms of what they considered to be extremism. That's what they were doing, rather than thinking we were general threats.
And what were they thinking about the ideology of Islamism? How were they focusing on that? How were they interacting with that?
So this was very difficult and thorny topic, because we were set up to tackle terrorism, the biggest threat being from Islamist extremism. So it goes without question that is absolutely what we should have been focusing on. However, we were met with a fear internally, a fear from local authority, and a fear from the general public to really tackle that issue. So I would have a conflict with fellow colleagues I was in Prevent and then in counter-extremism, colleagues around actually tackling Islamist extremist organisations. At one point, I was told that I had some sort of unhealthy obsession with Islamist extremist organisations. In fact, my specialty, my expertise in this topic was my very undoing in the role.
Because you actually knew about it and you were willing to look at the risks from extremism.
I was absolutely held with suspicion, just as William Shawcross said.
And William Shawcross also said that some of these organisations actually had links with Prevent, that Prevent got friendly with them to some extent.
We had those working within the Home Office or Prevent practitioners. We are trained by the Home Office, employed by local authorities, that were completely ideologically misaligned. So yes, there were occasions, shockingly, where Prevent practitioners did grow close, align themselves with those that were on the list of Islamist extremist organisations held by the Home Office.
So if they were getting into that position, how could they possibly investigate them and prevent future radicalisation and extremism?
Well, they can't. And you can't begin to imagine how difficult this situation is, because you're dealing with those that are ideologically misaligned within. Then you're dealing with local authorities. I was based in a Labour local authority that then had its issue around the sensitivity of votes and concern about how it appeared in the public eye. So they were very cautious about it too. And then you had those that are genuinely feared for their own safety. You look at Bateley Grammar School, you look at what's just happened with Wakefield, you look at the actual aggressive threats to blasphemy, and people are frightened to do this work. So how many people really are going to stick the course and effectively do this work? Not many.
And where do you see the problem lying? Was it with the Home Office or with the local council, or was it actually in the structure of Prevent, which may seem to be what William Shawcross was indicating?
Absolutely everything. Absolutely everything. You have got the structure being that we are placed and employed by local authorities that are politically actually somewhat against the Prevent agenda in itself. Then you've got a Home Office that poorly recruited. We're talking about an emerging threat that not a lot of people are experts in. There's not a lot of us to recruit from. So we had poorly recruited individuals. And then you've got a societal ill in which we find it so difficult to critique anything other than that which is power and authority. Essentially, the white man is the only thing that can be criticised.
And there was no legal definition of Islamism, so that you didn't know particularly what the threat was that you were looking for, what the radical Islamic threat was.
With this point, in my experience, maybe it was what I took on, but I felt like we did have training on what Islamism was, but we had infighting about that and infighting about how we should tackle it. I came away as an expert, and I am now an expert at the Henry Jackson Society, but not everyone in there was an expert or left an expert. So that may come down to personal differences.
And we need expertise, don't we? But speaking as a Catholic and looking at the history of Catholicism in this country, there was a suspicion at one point of all Catholics. Just by being a Catholic, you were suspicious, even though most Catholics were law-abiding and peaceful, which is also very fundamentally true of most Muslims, law-abiding, peaceful people committed to the country. It's just this very small number of extreme radicals. How do you try and differentiate to make sure that you're treating the bulk of people who are good people fairly?
Well, absolutely. And I think there was a recent study that was done by Crest that looked at support from the British Muslim community for tackling Islamist extremism. And it found that within the British Muslim public, just 4% less than the general public are really concerned about Islamist extremism. 80% of them support the Prevent programme. So we are looking at a distinct minority. But the issue is whenever we talk about Islamist extremism, because of the way Islamists have held the narrative on this and the narrative on Prevent and the narrative on counter-extremism, we are made to feel when we're talking about it, and the public is hearing that we're talking about Muslims as a whole because of the way the narrative has been owned. But we are talking about a distinct section, and we need to get comfortable with tackling that. This is a section that believes that women should be in servitude, the LGBT community should not exist, and blasphemers should be killed. They are the antithesis of leftist thinking, and that is what we should be opposing.
But at the same time, it's very important not to marginalise the Muslim community, who, as you say, are strongly opposed to this and are concerned about it.
And that needs to be an easy thing to understand and get our heads around. We need to get comfortable with this. It's not too hard to understand.
Well, it shouldn't be, but clearly it was with your experience that people were...
We were responding to a way of thinking in society which is a concern around tackling anything that isn't coming from perceived power or the white man, as I've said already. So when you're looking at tackling something that does exist within a minority, you are worried because you feel like you may be critiquing the wider minority, but you are not. We're talking about a distinct section, and we must tackle it because this is fascism, this is the right wing.
And so then they come on to people with anti-Brexit or pro-Brexit views, people like me, as a sort of balance because they feel embarrassed about who they're looking at.
That's what they did to you. They used you for balance.
And that's a complete... I mean, that undermines the whole purpose of what they're trying to do because everybody then laughs
Absolutely, what a
at
waste of our money.
Well, thank you for what you've been doing and for your courage on tackling it and coming on. I wish you every success with the Henry Jackson Society. We have, of course, contacted the Home Office for comment, and we were hoping to hear back from them, but we haven't. After the break, we'll be looking at the new plan to stop the channel crossings once and for all. Don't go away. Come back then.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway...
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Thank you. Stephen says, Prevent has become an absurdity, but let's not forget this happened on the watch of the Conservative government and is a massive failure of the Home Office and Home Secretary. I would say in defence of Priti Patel that when she was Home Secretary, she set up this inquiry by William Shawcross, which has revealed the mistakes. So I think a word of defence is called for. Bob, it is frightening to see how the left and the woke brigade infiltrate the mechanisms of government like Prevent and distort their work to align with their own ideology. How can this stealth be stopped? Well, I hope by revealing it on programmes like this. And then Anne, the Prevent scheme was another load of rubbish. Anne doesn't mince her words. She's a clear-spoken lady. It concentrated more on right-leaning people like yourself, that's me, than Islamist potential terrorists. So thank you. Let's move on now to the small boat crossings, because they have reached enormous levels over the last couple of years. As many as 45,756 individuals. That's a wonderfully precise figure. I don't know quite how they count them, but nearly 50,000 made the hazardous journey in 2022. This places enormous strain on our resources and favours those with the money paid to the traffickers, which can reach into thousands of pounds, and the strength, they are mostly young men, to come over. So what safe and legal channels do we have that genuine asylum seekers can use? How can we help those, say, in the camps of Lebanon, largely women and children, who might want to claim asylum on these shores? Well, I'm very pleased now to be joined by the human rights lawyer, David Haig, to discuss just that. David, good evening.
Good evening, Jacob.
Thank you so much. So, what can we do to make sure that we have safe routes for genuine asylum seekers? Because I think this country is generous. It's been generous to people from Ukraine and from Hong Kong, had a very good scheme from Syria when David Cameron was Prime Minister. What can we do to help them whilst tackling the small boats problem?
Well, I think that the thing that we need to look at now, if there were safe asylum routes that were legal, the question would be people that are genuine still be coming over on boats? There are some genuine ones that come over on the boats and put their lives at risk if there was a safe legal route. Now, it's accepted, and I think even Rishi Sunak has said with the new policy that they will consider introducing new safe legal routes later, but there aren't any at the moment. And I think that's one of the things that should be done, because in a way you would then pull the rug away from some of the people smugglers, because if there's a safe legal route that doesn't put someone's life at risk and that effectively costs less, then that's at least some more people that would be coming in safely and rightly if they are genuine.
But if you couldn't get in on a safe route, wouldn't you still be tempted to go on an unsafe route? Isn't it the fact that demand massively exceeds supply of what we are able to do?
Well, absolutely, and I think, we've always been an island, effectively, so we've always had that problem. People will always, there are people that are always going to want to try and better their lives for commercial reasons. People will continue to do that, and we then, of course, do need humane practices and procedures that are effective and that work to deal with people when that happens, and that's something that we don't have, clearly, because, as you said, the figures are going up and up and up, and the only people benefiting at the end of the day are the actual people smugglers.
And do you think that it would be possible to have, through more legal routes, an answer to the human rights issue? That if you've got the legal routes, then that allows you to be more robust in removing people who've come illegally? Or are the two separate?
I think effectively they're effectively two separate things. I think one of the problems that we have at the moment in, as you saw with the Rwanda plan, is that the current bodies that we're a member of, the current legislation as it is, and current judgments in the court mean that even if a new plan does come in terms of sending people back, which Rishi has mentioned, it's going to face the same problem. So we need to change various parts of legislation. Otherwise, even if the government do get this plan through, it will end the same way as Rwanda. And until that's changed, nothing will.
Thank you, David. That's very helpful and full of insights for us. But I'm now joined by my panel, my excellent panel, Baroness Foster of Oxton and the former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Peter, do you think it is possible within human rights law to come up with a scheme that repatriates people who come into the country illegally?
Well, I don't know. I suspect it's going to be a lengthy legal battle. My concern about what we've not had announced but was splashed on Sunday newspapers, we're told it's coming tomorrow, covers a couple of areas. One is we've got a system at the moment that is not working, with more and more people locked up in ex-hotels or havens for communicable diseases and mental health crises. That's not working. Then, as you alluded to, we've got a new plan that may also not work, where you essentially erode the rights of asylum seekers, which are not actually based purely on British law. They're based, as you know, on the United Nations Convention on Human Rights, which we can't just rip up at a moment's notice.
And is there a Labour answer to this? I mean, I'm not asking you to be a spokesman formally for the Labour Party, but is there within Labour thinking an answer to the illegal migration problem?
Yeah, and I think Keir Starmer's recognised that public trust in Labour over immigration, legal immigration, has fluctuated enormously. So Labour's got to be honest with itself and its own voters. So Yvette Cooper's been saying for a year or so greater cooperation with France. That is now happening, and I think some of the Trussian rhetorics of arguments with President Macron has gone out of the window. Today, Yvette Cooper has said Labour, the government, should set up a national unit to really focus on trafficking and people smuggling, because there's so much misery and illness and death as a result. And then I quickly looked at her three-point plan. The other one's really to fast-track asylum cases, because we all know that whatever the circumstances of someone waiting for a decision, they're often waiting in a hotel or hostel that is poor, cold, overcrowded, rife with disease, and puts them at risk of crime.
Whoever's saying it, whether it's Labour as eloquently put by Peter or it's the Conservatives, isn't it always the same? There's always a new plan, there's always a determination to do it, and as Nigel Farage was saying in the previous programme, we've heard it all before.
We have heard a lot before, Jacob, and I think we've got to the point now where we've got to take a seriously hard line on this. The difficulty we've had, I think, over the last few years, well, as you mentioned, the numbers of people that have been coming over in the last couple of years, I think from 2018 there's been over now 100,000. This is costing roughly about £8 billion a year to house people and to deal with all of this. I think in addition to this, this is turned into a big business. There is a supply chain. There are many, in my view, many vested interests into not stopping this, whether it's from the people smugglers themselves, they're multimillionaires, many of them. In addition to that, clearly you've got businesses who are housing the refugees now, and you've got charities and various other organisations. And of course, I'm not saying that they have bad intentions, but they've never done anything to look at doing positive things, which we've tried to bring forward, because we've not even been able to deport people.
And one of the things Conservatives, it seems to me, get unfairly criticised for is that if by taking tough decisions you save people's lives, that is to say sending people home who come illegally, you get criticised for the tough decision but not for saving people's lives. Actually sorting out the small boats people will be good for people. It will save them from this very risky journey and save them from the hands of the people traffickers.
Well, of course it. Your previous guest from the Henry Jackson Society, we have only got to look, and this isn't all people, we have 98% of those people who have arrived have thrown away their documentation. We have no clue who they are. The primary purpose of any government is the safety and security of the people that live in the country. That's their primary purpose, above everything else. We've only just recently heard about the case in Bournemouth, where, again, a failed asylum seeker, there was a whole list of Labour MPs and others. They signed a letter, they stopped the deportation, and this man went on to murder a young man. In 2020, we had the cases. We've had London Bridge back in 2017. We've had a number of horrendous cases, and these were people who were failed asylum seekers. You then found often that they had committed terrible offences in their country of origin when they managed to find out where the country of origin was, and this cannot continue.
Peter, Ernesto Elliott is, I think, the man who should have been sent back. A lot of people on the left protested to keep him here. He then went on to murder somebody. Is this a one-off thing that we shouldn't worry about, or is actually this type of activism putting the country at risk?
Of course we should be concerned about it, and I'm sure, like all of us, your thoughts are ultimately with the family of the person who died. But in terms of political question, it does worry me the way it's put, because, again, I heard over the weekend someone say that Labour MPs had stopped a deportation case, and, Jacob, as you know, the law is set by Parliament, where there's a Conservative majority, and it's enforced enforced by police and the immigration service and judges, but politicians of all stripes take up cases in their constituency. Clearly, this one has a horrendous and tragic outcome, and I think it's going to obviously make MPs think twice about putting pen to paper. But there is a role, again, as you know, for MPs to speak up where they believe there's been an injustice.
That is a fundamental role of a Member of Parliament. Well, thank you to Jacqueline and Peter for coming on. But still ahead, we're going to be doing the cleaning. The Hoover man and inventor extraordinaire, Sir James Dyson, has written a letter disgruntled from Gloucestershire, I think, letter to Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor. Find out where after the break. Don't go anywhere. Not that you were thinking of it.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch. But unfortunately, the printer's broken, so I'm going to have to use modern technology and use WhatsApp messages. So Mike has said, is the border farce, oh, this is very good, more of a border farce? So not a force, but a farce. May the farce be with you. And James has said, this is a really good question. Should we leave the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights? So thank you for that. Tycoon Sir James Dyson, of Hoover and Airblade hand dryer fame, among many other achievements, warned Jeremy Hunt against a double tax grab on businesses ahead of the budget. People's money is their own. The government has no money. It's always taxpayers' money. And low taxes are the right thing to do. It creates prosperity for all. People spend their own money better than the government spends it for them. But still with me are my distinguished panel, Baroness Foster of Oxton and former editor of Labour List Peter Edwards, to discuss that very proposition. Jacqueline.
Jacob.
Lower taxes. You in favour of them?
Oh, absolutely. Small state, low tax, Thatcherite.
Peter, squeeze the rich till the pips squeak, as Dennis Healey was supposed once to have said.
Yes, supposed once to have said. That's not my view. We'd all like to see lower taxes and are conscious that there's a deficit at the moment. My worry about what James Dyson has said is he's a hugely successful British entrepreneur, greatly innovative, and he's speaking out in the national interest now, but previously having moved his residence to Singapore. So to me, that degrades his credibility to a certain extent, even though I understand now he's returned to Britain.
Isn't it exactly the reverse, that it's a reminder that global capital, global wealth is mobile, and that if we have tax rates that are too high, the richest in society will simply move and there'll be less tax revenue for public services?
Oh, I do disagree, and this came up when I was a financial journalist previously, and you'll be familiar with how the bank levy works, introduced after the financial crisis. HSBC, for example, did a triennial review and keeps end up staying in Britain each time. There's the same suggestion about high net worth individuals. But of course, businesses and high net worth individuals stay, not just because of the tax rate, but the rule of law, democracy, good public services, good quality education, stability, an independent judiciary. All these other factors matter for a good workforce and a stable money-making environment.
But there are lots of other stable countries in the world, and isn't it AstraZeneca that's just said it's not going to invest here, it's going to invest in the Republic of Ireland, which has 12% tax rate?
Absolutely. I think I'm hoping, beyond hope, that this increase on corporation tax will not take place, but we know it will. That will then push those increases up about 34% on business. You have to listen to the likes of James Dyson and others, and competition drives innovation. If you tax and tax and tax, which is... I know we've had a difficult couple of years. We've spent hundreds of billions with COVID and everything else. But at the end of the day, you know, the conversation is around growth. It is around productivity. And the higher you tax, the less likely you are to be able to achieve that growth and productivity that you need. Ireland, if I may just say, the Republic of Ireland is 12.5%. The United States is, I think, 21%. I can't see the US signing up to any global rate, by the way. China says they're roughly 25%, but the regions range between 2.5% and 15%. So that's why there's not an issue if you're looking at obviously competing at a very favourable way throughout the world.
But Peter, the thing that I think is forgotten about all of this is not whether companies leave or not, but that when they're considering new investment, they're interested in their net return rather than their gross return, and that therefore the UK becomes less attractive, or they put prices up or reduce employment, and therefore the overall effect of increasing corporation tax is bad for the economy.
But first of all, there's a countervailing pressure in terms of businesses, particularly large ones, needs access to a skilled labour force, which you can generally get in the UK. I don't think we should follow some of the other examples like the Irish model, because, of course, the Irish economy blew up even before the British financial crash. And then another example prayed in aid was perhaps America, where there have historically been lower tax rates. But actually, one thing that worries me is in America that, you know, the state is smaller in some respect, and if you're poor, paying for healthcare and getting healthcare terrifies people.
But the American example is the other way around, that the rate was much higher and it was reduced by Donald Trump to have a lower rate with fewer write-offs, and a huge amount of money, tens of billions of dollars, came from outside the US into the US, because previously if you brought money into the US you were taxed, I think, 35%. And so he brought the rate down, which led to more revenue and more investment. So it was a very successful policy, cutting corporation tax.
Can I, if I may, you know, this is basic maths. This is basic economy or home economics. The lower we tax, we are able to tax, and business too, then the more investment and more attractive we are to outward investors and inward investment too. and domestically, that works as well. And I don't think it's an issue. You're talking about labour costs and various things like that. The level of corporation tax, I don't think reflects on the labour costs particularly. I mean, what it may mean is the higher it is for a business, actually, the less they can pay the people that work there. So if they're not lumbered with really high taxation, then, of course, I think that that's a great attraction for them to expand and be able to employ people at a good rate.
Briefly, I didn't refer to labour cost. I referred to having access to a skilled workforce, because I think there are all these other reasons why companies choose to do business in the UK. And I think after the kind of failed experiment with Trussian economics, the idea that we're carrying a very large deficit after COVID, that we could carry on just ramming down one tax rate after another as a very short-term mechanism, often paid for by borrowing to stimulate growth, works. That has been proven wrong.
No, Elizabeth, Truss's economic policy lasted all of about 2 seconds and had no influence on the general way that we are taxing and spending or anything else in this country. She was the Prime Minister for a very short period of time. What we are looking at is, in the 80s, and I remember it well with Margaret Thatcher, it took some years, we got the top rate of tax down to 40% for personal taxation. They took more money into the Treasury than they'd ever had before in their history, pretty well, from when tax had come in. It is logical that if we can tax less, that we can attract more. Because don't forget, there's 83% of businesses in the United Kingdom are SMEs, small and medium-sized businesses. We want to encourage entrepreneurs. It's not the big corporations. So we also, the SMEs are the engine room of this country. We all know the blue chip companies, the company I worked for, the airline industry and all that. People know the names of those. But to generate the wealth in this country and the growth, we need the SMEs and we need all of business to be able to be really competitive.
Peter, you can have the last word on this, I think.
Very briefly, I had the privilege of writing about SMEs as a financial journalist. Labour has said it would reform business rates, because that's the tax that really hurts SMEs. Yeah. As you say, most SMEs don't pay corporation tax, but let's reform business rates, which, like council tax, is a pretty antiquated system that, for various reasons, governments have been unafraid to touch. But now the position is so bad that we are going to have to make these tough choices.
Well, they need to have a word with the Labour councils, because they charge the most most in business rates and most in council tax across the country.
Because they're
so
poor
there's a good
areas.
start. Not necessarily.
Well, we'll never get reformed business rates. That's one of those things that's been argued for by decades. I happen to think there's quite a good chance that corporation tax won't rise in the budget. I think that may be the rabbit out of the hat. But thank you to both of my panellists. Coming up next, the so-called lockdown files have revealed many unsavoury things about those in Westminster. But do we get the politicians we deserve? We're back in 3, and I'm sure you will be too.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Oh, welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Once again, you've been getting in touch with your male Moggs, and Bridget is our heroine of the evening because she makes the brilliant point. The more we tax, the more companies will leave this country. It's happened before. People with money make employment. The Chancellor doesn't seem to understand businesses, large or small. I'm not sure about the last bit, because he once called for a tax rate of 12%. But sometimes people when out of office are more optimistic than when they're in office. Much has been made of Mr. Matthew Hancock's WhatsApp scribblings. First, there's the debasement of his office as a Minister of the Crown, with his somewhat vulgar language. Then there's the questionably villainous deployment of the new variant, the frightening the pants off the population. I wonder if he means pants in the American or the English sense. The mocking of those locked up in quarantine hotels, the undignified preoccupation with his own popularity, not so high at the moment, and of course the "I have, after all," and I am quoting, "cheated on my wife" admission. But Mr. Tim Stanley, Daily Telegraph columnist, has made a rather interesting point. Basically that Mr. Hancock serves us right and reflects modern Britain. One may even say he embodies the zeitgeist. Should we in fact look at ourselves in the mirror and acknowledge that in a democracy, the kind of politicians whom we elect and the policies that we enact are to a certain degree downstream of the culture that we as a nation form as a collective? Well, Mr. Stanley, was that what you were saying this morning? Are you blaming the British people for wanting a lockdown?
In a democracy, you've ultimately got to blame the people for the government. They get the one they deserve. When the lockdown files were first released, of course, everyone in Westminster was worried about ugly things they might have said to Matt Hancock on their WhatsApps. I was worried a message might come out in which I'd said something nice about him. That at some point I might have said, "Well done, Matt," or "You gave a great speech," but fortunately none of that's leaked just yet. Look, I think in the case of Matt Hancock, I make my argument that we get what we deserve on a couple of counts. One is, how did this man of limited ability become health secretary? And I think it says something about the politics of the late 2010s that we were not taking health very seriously. The NHS, of course, has been devolved, it's been federalised, there's little for a health secretary to do in many regards, but also the issue had been put on the back burner because of Brexit and because people just weren't talking about these systemic long-term crises in the health system. But the other issue is that when they were having an argument about whether or not to lift lockdown restrictions over the summer of 2020, Hancock and his supporters within the cabinet were able to point to polls that showed that the public, broadly speaking, wanted lockdown, possibly even wanted more lockdown for longer. So the style of Hancock, the method of Hancock, it actually was what people wanted.
Well, you see, I thought you were a bit hard on Jeremy Hunt as Health Secretary. Actually, I think he did a good job as Health Secretary within the constraints of it being devolved to NHS England and the limitations of what he could do, which was the sort of Lansley inheritance. But where I thought you were unfair on the British people was that they'd been terrified. They'd been told that if they went outside, if they hugged their grandmother, they were going to kill their grandmother.
Yes.
If you've had this rammed down your throat, and they used behavioural scientists to get the message across. Do you remember that sinister point that they showed Boris Johnson clips of lots of global leaders wearing masks to make him feel he had to wear a mask? And we now know that these masks were pretty pointless. that once you've scared the British public, of course opinion polls are going to say we're all in favour of this. And that actually it's not the public's fault, it's what they were being fed that led them to believe this.
But why, so to step back, the question is why at this stage in the history of our democratic country did we have a government that was willing and able to get away with scaring people, and why did it work? I suspect that in previous generations it wouldn't have done. A lot of senior Tories have argued that Margaret Thatcher's cabinet would not have done these things, would have challenged the scientists and would have made a big, harder fight for liberty and keeping the economy going. And we know that in the late 60s, the country was hit by a Hong Kong flu, which in many ways was quite similar to COVID, and the life of the nation basically rumbled on. In fact, the government's argument was the flu wasn't so bad because it largely targeted the old. And because it didn't hit the young, they thought we can keep things pretty much going. So what is it about this time in our history that the government was inclined to frighten us and we were so easily frightened?
Well, the decision-making was very limited. It wasn't cabinet decision-making. The cabinet was a rubber stamp to what was decided by the Quad. And the reverence in which the NHS is held was, I think, fundamental. Because bear in mind, we were all being told we had to save the NHS, which always seemed to me a really bad argument, because I thought the NHS was there to save me if I were ill, rather than for me to save the NHS. I think it had the order of priority wrong. But the admiration for the NHS as an institution seemed so strong that that's why politicians and then people felt they had to go along with it.
But to go back to my earlier point about the health service, this is partly the Tories' fault, and it goes back to Jeremy Hunt and Matt Hancock. This idea that one is no longer reforming the NHS, or even possibly managing it, but one is a cheerleader for it. That's what the Health Secretary became under those two men, such that when the NHS was under threat, after these 10 years of the Tories only emphasising that they would fund it, not that they would reform it, because it doesn't work terribly well, it meant that the first thing the Tories instinctively did was say, well, we've got to save it, and people rallied to that message.
And the opposition was very strongly in favour of it. So you had an opposition that would actually have been happy to lock us down even more and for even longer.
Yes.
So the only opposition came from the Tory backbenches and a small number of people within government who had limited ability to make the argument.
But it wasn't just that there was scant opposition, it's that there was widespread enthusiasm. To give an example, the churches. The government did not tell the churches to suspend services. The churches did it and essentially asked the government to tell them to do it.
Yes, so at the very beginning, I think you do need to differentiate, because at the very beginning, everyone wanted to lock down. There were very few people who didn't. Even I was willing to go along with it at that time. By the second lockdown, I certainly had Catholic bishops getting in touch with me saying we must not close down the second time. And so what we see with the Hancock files is that he wanted to keep on locking down the whole way through and make it tighter at every opportunity, and used information to ensure that Boris Johnson would go along with that as far as possible, and indeed the rest of the political class.
Yeah, but I suspect he probably was in tune with public sentiment on that. And OK, I know you're arguing he was shaping it, but I suspect people were willing to be shaped, because I think there's something about Britain in 2023 which is neurotic. And part of it is to do with Brexit. There's a sense of a grand discombobulation, that the politics is up in the air, things feel chaotic. And I've described lockdown as Remainers' revenge, not in the narrow sense if it was anything to do with Brexit, but rather it was the reassertion of norms, of bureaucratic power, of expertise, and amongst a public which felt that things were anarchic. Here was a chance to reset everything with a grand reboot via lockdown.
But it's absolutely a great reminder that the experts aren't normally right, and that if we'd ignored the right experts, we'd have done better, as Sweden did.
And in fact, we weren't even being led by expertise, we were being led by politics. That's the really, I think that's the central shocking thing about the Hancock files. We always thought it was politicians being dictated to by scientists. We can now see that actually scientists were saying, here's a range of things you could do, and it was politicians who were saying, right, we'll take the toughest option.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to have had Tim with us, because it's quite worrying that we did want this lockdown. That's all from us tonight. We'll be back tomorrow at 8 p.m, but up next it's Patrick Christie's in for Dan Wootton. Patrick, what's in store tonight?
Well, absolutely loads. Great show as ever, Jacob. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to be having a look at the protests that are taking place outside a migrant hotel just near Leicestershire. And I'm asking the question, does it really make you far right if you care about workers' rights, the preservation of your local area and law and order? I think that's no. I also have Kerry Katona, who's going to be joining me to talk about the dangers of drug use in light of Prince Harry's reckless comments.
Well, that sounds an absolutely wonderful show. Very interesting to hear what they're doing with dispersal orders. That's coming up after the weather, but it's sounding quite chilly tonight. Thanks to all my guests. We'll be back at 8 o'clock tomorrow. Goodbye.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst. Welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. It stays on the cold side over the coming few days. The risk of snow and ice widely frosts overnight as well. Looking at the bigger picture, Arctic air plunging south across the UK, bringing snow showers to many northern areas. Across the south, we will see some weather fronts, bringing some outbreaks of rain, sleet and some snow at times too over the next few days. A lot to play for with the details, so stay tuned to the forecast. Turning icy as we head into the early hours of tonight. Further snow showers for Northern Ireland, Scotland. Cloudier across central parts of England and Wales and southern England, where we will see some outbreaks of rain, sleet and snow. Met Office warnings for snow and ice cover quite large parts of the UK to take us into Tuesday morning. Temperatures starting well below freezing across Scotland, Northern England, Northern Ireland. Snow showers from the word go here, but plenty of sunny spells too. Cloudier skies across parts of the Midlands, southern Wales. Outbreaks of rain for southern counties of England with some sleet and snow mixed in there too. Some slushy accumulations possible. Lots of places seeing sunshine in the afternoon on Tuesday, but very cold. Temperatures below average, 3 to 5 Celsius generally. Some places in Scotland staying below freezing all day. Further icy stretches possible quite widely as we move into Tuesday evening and overnight. Further snow showers for northern Scotland. Temperatures plummeting well below freezing. Further weather systems moving into southern parts of England and Wales. Some uncertainty with the placement of this, but could lead to some accumulating snow across the higher ground here, so do stay tuned to the forecast. Warnings already in force across southwest England to take us into Wednesday here. So it stays quite grey, the risk of some rain, sleet and snow across southern counties of England, but elsewhere Wednesday looking like a cold sunny day, plenty of sunny spells. Still the risk